Over the past few years, Canon has been crushing it with all of their new mirrorless cameras, from the EOS R to the R6 and the R5, the R3, and now even, the R5C. What they're lacking though, in my personal opinion, is lenses. And that's why I think that lenses like this Viltrox 85 1.8 for the native RF mount are a pretty sweet thing. Conceptually, obviously they're gonna be great, but how do they work in practice? Let's find out. As a wedding photographer, 85mm for many of us becomes kind of a staple lens. It's long enough that you can do documentary things and get closer during things like ceremonies and speeches. But also 85 is sort of just a classic focal length for portraits, and most people using primes are using some sort of wide angle and then some sort of telephoto. 85 has always paired really, really well with the 35mm focal length for me, and I use that combo almost exclusively for probably a decade. Now, I will preface this with the fact that I have not used the other native RF 85mm, so the 85 f2 macro or the 85 f1.2L, but I will say that I don't think the person that is thinking about buying the 85 1.2L RF is probably going to go for this, as they are just vastly different price points, and honestly, the person that's gonna buy it probably isn't going to be looking at this, and I'm totally okay with that. The thing about this is, again, there are just not a lot of other options out there for the Canon RF system at this point, but having a lens that is much, much smaller, fairly lightweight, and not needing to have that extra adapter here, it does feel significantly better than an EF lens being, adapted onto this platform. Not that it's bad, and those work fantastic, but the overall kind of balance and feel of it all just is a lot better with a native lens. So as far as build quality goes, it's very simple here. We have a single manual and autofocus switch. We have some pretty mellow branding and whatnot. The Viltrox thing here is engraved slightly. And then you have your minimum focusing distance at 0.8 meters or 2.62 feet, as well as your filter size at 72mm. The build quality also is nice. This is a metal construction here, some sort of very lightweight, aluminum style thing. But I do think it is a well-made lens. It doesn't feel cheap. It definitely doesn't feel very plasticky. As far as image quality goes as well, I will admit that my hopes were not very high, and I didn't have high expectations for this. So in hearing that, I was definitely surprised by the image quality. For the price point and for what you're getting out of this, I definitely think that it can be in a professional's kit, and it's not something that would be, at least looked down upon by someone like me, knowing what I know about this. Sharpness in the center was great, no issues there. The rendering and the out of focus elements were also really, really good. I didn't see a ton of chromatic aberration. I definitely didn't check from distortion, but I didn't really notice that as a thing. But also in the camera, it does pull up the Viltrox kind of setup, so that is not necessarily a bonus, but it's something that the camera definitely recognizes the lens and can put some profile corrections on it. Now, one of the things that is kind of odd, but I'm assuming it's because of firmware things that the camera can't deliver, it does have a USB-C port on the back here, and the process of updating it was definitely not my favorite, but the fact that you can update the firmware on a lens nowadays is pretty cool. So while I wish there was a better setup for it, it's definitely better than nothing, and I do appreciate that it has that feature. Now, focus is normally pretty snappy and consistent. I didn't really see myself missing many frames, and overall, a fantastic performer. The R6 is definitely one of the best cameras cameras that I've ever used in terms of autofocus, and so not sure necessarily what is better, the camera or the lens here, but I don't think that the lens lags behind in that area. One of the things I will say though is, in terms of focus, I have run into a pretty odd issue where if I am trying to focus from somewhere sort of far away to something pretty close, it often will have a really hard time figuring out what's happening there. And so there have definitely been times where if there's not a lot of contrast and I'm moving from something, I've needed to pop this thing into manual focus to kind of get it where I need it to be. I think it just needs a lot of contrast and a lot of light to work well. So I'm not sure if that's something that is an issue with the lens itself, but I haven't had that issue with other lenses. So there's something in here that is not communicating the information enough to the camera in pretty extreme conditions, but it's definitely something that I've noticed more than once and I guess wanted to address. So overall, I think this is, again, a great lens. There are plenty of people who I would definitely recommend pick this up. Again, if you have the money, I do think that, buying the 85 1.2 is probably a great thing to do and you probably should do it. But if you don't want the size, you don't want to spend the money, it definitely is a great performer, and especially for the price point and the size, it's 100% something I can recommend. The lack of different third-party options in the Canon RF system currently, I think, is one of its biggest downfalls in comparison to some of the other manufacturers. So having a company like Viltrox jumping in and making other lenses for this mount is only something that I can see being better for the system overall. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions that I didn't answer in this video, leave them below and I can try to answer them. Subscribe if you aren't already, and then I will see you all on the next one.